From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. On today's show, you know, we all like to make fun of the rubber stamp city council, but it really is a paragon of robust democratic debate when you compare it to some of the other governmental bodies around these parts. There are scores of boards and commissions, pretty much all appointed, some of them even paying their members, and none of us really know what they do, when they meet, what's on their agendas. But Aldertrack is on the case. Their new quarterly report illustrates for possibly the first time the 68 governing bodies that regulate everything from zoning to fashion policy, and all the hundreds of people who sit on them too. It's a fascinating glimpse into the sort of sub-government that's rarely in the news, and all those hundreds of men and women who volunteer hundreds and hundreds of hours to go to all of these meetings. We're going to ask Mike Fourcher what it all means. And we'll talk, of course, about Mayor Emanuel's new tax plan, the new trauma center, diet, maybe a little transit-oriented policy, development policy, whatever. And the guy to do it with is Mike Fourcher, who knows everything.
Great to be here.
Because
Thank you very much.
You are one of the founders of Aldertrack.
Yes,
so
I am.
You do. You have to know everything.
A lot of things cross through my brain. I don't know how much I remember.
Yeah. Well, I got to say that we've said this before on the show, but it's such a great idea to create a new little pool of journalism that focuses on City Hall. Because, I mean, obviously the papers still have their beat reporters, but as I've mentioned about 15,000 times on the show, I once was a reporter for public radio.
Sure.
Back in the, what was that, the 80s.
Right, when you used stone tablets.
That's and
right.
And it was
great.
We had to get our chisels sharpened all the time.
Fred Flintstone loved you.
But you know, it was so interesting because they had to build extra rooms in the press area for all the radio reporters, all the print reporters, and it was a very different kind of day than it is now.
And we actually keep our desk in the radio room.
Oh, do you? In the old yellow
City
room?
Hall. Yeah, we like the radio room. It's nice and cozy.
It's a nice room, yeah. So your idea was we're going to actually have reporters who cover all of these committee meetings.
Yes.
And we're going to report on them.
Yeah.
And I, of course, I think I'm a charter subscriber. Every day I sit down and read these things. Now, of course, I am the kind of guy who finds this stuff interesting, but I just think I read this and I'll see like the Zoning Board of Appeals having some kind of meeting about something or other, or the zoning committee.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I wouldn't have been able to read this anywhere else. And
That's right.
And it is important to know this stuff.
Well, I mean, the whole idea of whether it's important is subjective.
I'll say it. It's important.
I think that there's a lot of things that everybody's trying to understand every day, and what we aim to do is serve the people who really care a lot about what happens in city government and need to know who's doing what, when, where, and how. So one of the things that we take great pains to do when we report on these zoning hearings is that we not only say what happened with a particular piece of property, but we'll also say who the developer is and who the attorney is that's representing the particular project. Because if you're in the development business, this is important information. You want to know that.
And also, if you're a community organizer or if you're just somebody who's affected by this project, you want to know these things. And also, part of the reason why I think we think of this stuff as just the boring minutia of government is because the really juicy stuff is never included in the narrative about these stories. So, for example, one of the things I really want to talk about today, as geeky as it is transit-oriented development.
Yeah,
and
love that stuff.
It's interesting because it is a clash of culture, it's a clash of policy, and I happen to live up around Jefferson Park, and for years there's a whole stretch of Lawrence that got plowed down 8 or 9 years ago, except for the bike shop. They wouldn't move. And it's fascinating because it got caught up in this really arcane policy discussion about TOD, transit-oriented development. The progressives would say, and I have to say, Mayor Daley and Mayor Emanuel were both in this camp, that if you're a block away from a big transit center like the Jefferson Park Station, what you need is you need to have high density development. You need taller buildings with smaller units so you can get lots of people in there, and they will use transit, and that will improve transit over the long run, blah, blah, blah.
Well, this is actually dinner table talk in my home, because I studied urban geography in college, and my wife is actually a planner. And actually, there's a TOD project that's going up half a block from our house. We live right by the Western Brown Line stop.
Oh, that's a huge.
And there's a 5-story building that's being built on Western Avenue. And
across from McDonald's.
Across from a 7-Eleven. And so a lot of people in the neighborhood oppose it. In fact, the neighborhood organization is opposing it because they say it doesn't fit the character of the neighborhood. And this is the standard conflict that goes on. And I'm not sure that this is necessarily progressive versus organization kind of a conflict. It is certainly a conflict that is ever present throughout the city. I don't know how else to define it except for not in my backyard versus pro. And this really gets down to a larger question, which is what some people have called the Parisification or the museumification of inner cities.
Interesting.
And if you look at Paris, Paris has taken great pains in order to make sure that there's no development above a certain height, that everything stays ever changing, and it all looks like it was in 1870, which is very beautiful and wonderful. But it means that the potential for growth is very low, and that density stays steady, and that the result is that as the city of Paris itself becomes more desirable to live in, because it all looks like 1870, that it becomes increasingly expensive and out of reach for people except for the most wealthy. And so then you have this ring that goes around the city of Paris, which is where all the poor people live, and where all the crime is and all the problems, and they're not addressed because they're not connected to the main city of Paris.
Outside the ring.
Outside of the ring. And there is a concern that unless you have adjustments for increasing density in desirable neighborhoods, that you're going to end up with a Parisification, a museumification. And if you look at neighborhoods...
Our mutual friend, Alderman Ed Buss, keep it like it was.
Right, keep it like it was. And if you look at neighborhoods like Lakeview or Lincoln Park, what has happened is that since the 1980s, those neighborhoods have gotten considerably less dense. I grew up in Lincoln Park in the 70s, and most of the houses around me were 3 flats. And those have all been turned into single families. That means basically a third of the number of people that once lived there. So it's less dense, it's more expensive. You really turned it into a very different kind of community than it was before. And so this is what I think TOD is about, which is trying to find ways to increase density in limited areas, but people that have those communities don't want to change that.
Part of the reason why it becomes such a fascinating debate is that there are reasonable people on both sides of this thing. I mean, for example, the building you're talking about, the one out by near where I live, the idea is that you're going to build these buildings that have a lot of people in them. They're one bedroom. And the most important thing is they have little to no parking in them.
That's right.
Which is, of course, a big change for the city.
That's right.
And the argument is, look, these people all go everywhere on bikes and on the L, so they're living a block away from the L. They're not going to have a car, so we can increase the density. The neighbors say that's just a bunch of crap. These people are going to get jobs downtown working as investment bankers. They're going to start earning a lot of money. They're going to buy a nice car, and they're going to park it out in front of my house because there's no place for them to park their car, and they're going to ruin my neighborhood.
Well, I don't know if less parking ruins a neighborhood. Certainly, when I was younger in Lincoln Park and there was a lot less affluence and fewer cars, it was easier to park. And then when I was older in the 90s and Lincoln Park was much more affluent, it was harder to park, but I think people still like living in Lincoln Park. So I'm not sure parking is connected to whether or not it's a desirable neighborhood.
And also, there is the NIMBYer aspect of it, which is I just don't like these people. These people are not like me, these people who are going to move into the neighborhood.
So I think that ultimately this is something that's, the mayor is clearly behind the idea of TOD. What's very interesting is that this last week, David Reifman, who's the new commissioner of planning, his old firm DLA Piper released a document that was against the TOD ordinance. So it came to a screeching halt. I think that we're probably going to have some adjustments to it is probably going to be the result. But it's hard for me to see how TOD doesn't move forward in one way or another. At the very least, the city needs to find a way to increase the amount of development throughout the city in order to be able to increase the property taxes for the city.
Absolutely. And you know, I would say that at least on the rail side, the CTA has really improved a lot in the last 8 to 10 years, and it's a much better system than it was. And I know, as someone who's been riding it since the mid '60s, I think I can say that. And the best way to continue improving it is to guarantee that it has an audience, to guarantee that there are people who want it and who will crowd it on Saturday night and Friday night, because they want to use it. It's part of their social scene, and then it gets a constituency. So it works that way. Well, anyway, so we started talking about your quarterly report thing, and I really encourage it. It's a great thing to do. And what I liked about it, and why I wanted to have you come on today, is because it puts the spotlight on this other kind of government that we just don't really think about. I mean, almost every major department, the libraries, police, fire, all the hardware departments, they all have these kind of external boards that govern them in some way or another. And I mean, you can't really generalize about them. There's 68 of them, but do we need them?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think first off, what we did is that we examined all of the different administrative boards and commissions that are in the city. We took pains to find out who the members are, to confirm who they are. Then we looked up their backgrounds. We cross-referenced it with past press releases and journal of proceedings from City Council. And we found in a number of cases, for instance, the City Library Board, which is really the governing body for the library, all of the members are currently on expired commissions. So they need to be reappointed. Legally, they're not really supposed to be making decisions about how the library is operated. We're told, well, no big deal. The state has never had a problem with that before. Still, you know, let's clean it up, guys. A lot of these boards and commissions are important, and they provide a lot of insight for things.
Police,
there's a police board, there's a park district board, and then there's other things. There's a board that oversees all of the inspectors for masonry contractors, and this board has, you know, some people who know a lot about masonry and that sort of thing. A crane operator oversight board. You know, then there are other groups which are really, you know, perfunctory, pro forma in a lot of ways, which is World Business Chicago, which is a fairly large organization.
How dare you? It's the biggest of them all. And
That's right.
And
dozens and dozens of people.
It was really fascinating. I took some time this morning to go through World Business Chicago. I mean, we all know about it, but I've never actually seen it in one place like that.
Who all the people are?
How many people are on that board?
You know, I didn't do a count. It's dozens.
It's
It's certainly. It's close. I think it's around 50.
I was going to say 40, but it's you know, it's some of the most influential people in Chicago.
Right.
So it's like a little private club, a little gathering of.
But you know, World Business Chicago doesn't really meet that often. It's not like they pass any kind of you know thing.
They have no legislative purpose.
They have no administrative purpose either. You know, unlike say the Zoning Board of Appeals, which actually has a real purpose. World Business Chicago is an organization that's really all about promoting the city. It provides the mayor with a group of people that he can tap and say, these are my advisors in this particular area. And it's everything from the founder of Groupon to the former CEO of McDonald's, you know, everything that you can imagine, every major corporation in Chicago. You know, a lot of these don't cost any money.
They don't do harm.
They don't do harm. And I think they are important, and I think they do make a difference. What is interesting is when you begin to see some of the same people again and again and again in different places. And one example is a gentleman named Blake Searcy, who serves on a number of different boards. I can't remember them right now, but you know, you see these people and their names repeated again and again. And you know, on the one hand, it's maybe because the mayor and his people have found these people to be reliable and that they do what they're supposed to be doing. On the other hand, it might be that maybe the perspective of the mayor's office is a little myopic and they're not looking quite as far afield as they could be.
Another circle out. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But either way, this is the first time that anybody's sat down and tried to figure out who all these people are. We have pictures of everybody and we have telephone numbers and email addresses when we can. So if you're interested in government and you want to be able to figure out how to maneuver in these particular areas, our subscribers
and you
now
want to know
have
when
this
the next
list.
meeting of the Fashion Advisory Council is?
It's a great board. It's a great board. Love that one.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's what's going on there. But I can't have you sitting at the table without taking advantage of talking about all the other things that are going on in Chicago right now, and sort of getting your perspective on the sort of the big picture of it. I was really taken by the announcement the other day, and see, I'm always interested also in just the way that things are done, the way that things are announced. But this announcement late at night in the press that there's going to be a new trauma center.
Right.
It's not exactly going to be where the activists wanted it to be, but there's going to be a trauma center.
Right, at St. Anthony's Hospital, which is now really part of Mount Sinai Hospital, because St. Anthony was having a lot of financial troubles and Mount Sinai was able to carry it for them. And they're on the southwest side.
California Avenue.
Yep, on California Avenue. I think that really it's easy to look at the issue of saying, well, why isn't there going to be another level 1 trauma center? And a level 1 trauma center means that there is a neurosurgeon and that there's a surgeon that is ready at all times there on site, not on call, but on site, that can do something with somebody at 2 a.m. They're there and ready to go. And that there's an anesthetic team as well, so that they can work within minutes. And that's very expensive. And that's because there's a lot of times when they're not working, and those people are expensive, and the equipment and the facilities are very expensive. And I think that this really goes back to a series of decisions that the state made in the 80s about how they wanted to fund hospitals and how hospitals were going to be supported. There is an organization called the Illinois Health Facilities Planning Board, and the Illinois Health Facilities Planning Board has to approve any changes to hospitals.
Yeah.
So if they're going to reduce the number of beds, if they're going to add a new facility, a new building, if they're going to have new services, or if they're going to get rid of them, they have to get the approval from the facilities board. And it was also about how the city was going to be channeling money for Medicaid and other things. And we've seen since the 80s closure of many, many, many hospitals. Michael Reese Hospital, which used to be one of the greatest hospitals in the country on the south side, no longer exists.
Yeah.
And they had a level 1 trauma center. Mercy Hospital, which was right next door, had a level 1 trauma center. There were all sorts of level 1 trauma centers throughout the city. They've all closed because it's too expensive and that the state is no longer willing to support those activities.
Yeah.
So I think that University of Chicago has been resistant to footing the bill for that and having that facility on site because they don't think that they can handle that kind of loss. And well, it's their organization.
Yeah, but it does call into question why, for something as radically important as this network of level 1s, why there can't be some kind of larger commitment organizationally or governmentally to sort of, to make sure this happens. I mean, yes, having a neurosurgeon on duty 24 hours is expensive, but so's having a firefighter on duty 24 hours a day.
Absolutely.
So, it's part of the thing that we as communitarians agree we need to have as part of our it's just part of our society.
Right.
And interestingly, I think plenty of people would say there are parts of the city that are very well served by level 1, and those people are not going to be losing their level 1. So it was a kind of a lack of resourcing in a part of town that really needed it, and it's not even clear whether it's going to.
Well, the south side isn't as dense as the north side, and all the population loss that was in the city was on the south and west sides. So we lost 250,000 people in the last 10 years. That's from that area where a lot of those hospitals are serving.
Yeah. But the need for level 1 remain
still
just
there.
as high there. So it really isn't so much a question of what the population is, it's a question of where the services are needed.
That's
and
right.
They're needed very badly there. This ties in to me, although they're not related in any way, but similar situation with the diet protest that's
Right.
going on. And I really want to get your take on this, because when you announce that you are going to remain until your death at the site of this place of protest, and that you will not give up until the thing you want is given to you, and the thing you want is not given to you, something has to break somewhere.
Right.
And we're at that point now.
You know, I don't know how this gets resolved. Clearly, you know, I have a kid who is in CPS, and neighborhood schools are important. And being able to have a community that you're connected to, that's near to you, is important. And schools, I think, actually are much more of part of the fabric of our lives in the city than I think they get credit for.
Yeah.
I think that this, too, goes to some bigger systemic issues. Again, Chicago has lost 250,000 people on the south and west sides, and that's a big part of that area is where Dyett High School is. The number of potential students going in that area has dropped. Now, some, rightfully so, say that the number of charter schools in that area has increased, so there is a problem there as well.
Yeah.
But I think that really a big issue that the mayor and others running CPS has attempted to avoid with different ways, including adding charter schools, is that the boundaries for a lot of the neighborhood schools need to be redrawn. And Dyett is part of that. And I think that the reason why there isn't a good neighborhood school in that area, or one of the reasons, is that the schools really haven't taken a hard look at the boundaries, or no, I think they've been looking at it quite a bit. I think the schools haven't had a willingness to redraw the boundaries and commit resources accordingly. It's an ugly question, because it then forces everyone to realize this is how many people live in an area that are able to go to a school, and this is how we're going to devote resources to them. What Daley and Daley and Emmanuel have done in order to avoid that, in part, is to create charter schools so they can just overlay something on top of the boundaries and avoid that issue entirely. Now, redrawing boundaries for schools is not only just an emotional issue, it's also a property tax issue, and it's also a home value issue.
Very good point.
In a lot of communities, the value of your home is tied directly to the school where the kids would go to. So changing the boundary will change how much money a lot of people's homes are worth, which would be a complete eruption.
Yeah, but of course now we're left with the sort of the ugly remainder of this, where the CPS announces, okay, we're going to give you everything you wanted. We're going to give you this neighborhood school with everything that you've claimed you want, but you won't be a part of it.
Right.
And that forces the organizers to claim that they're going to continue their hunger strike. And it forces the mayor into a corner of his own, in which if something does happen and one of these people become violently ill or unfortunately die, what does the mayor do then? You know,
I think that this is really a product of some of the larger problems that Emmanuel has had with relationships with community organizations and with community overall. There has been, almost from the beginning of his first term, a lack of trust between him and community organizations. And he rarely has tried to reach out to community organizations and build personal relationships with them. And this is a case where the community organization has very little trust, very little belief that the mayor is going to act in their interest. And conversely, the city organizations, who are basically an extension of the mayor, don't really trust that they can work with the community organizations. So I think the solution the mayor has come up with is, we're going to create something that is going to be, okay, we'll satisfy your problem, but you're not going to be a part of it, as you said. And so the city can avoid having to deal with these people.
It thinks.
Right. And these people will probably continue to be around because they live in the neighborhood, and they'll continue to be antagonistic one way or another to the mayor. I think that the mayor and his team believes that they will solve problems with or without the help of the community.
Of Cocoa.
Whatever community it might be.
We're talking about the mayor, and we're talking about sort of brass knuckles politics. And one of the things that, of course, is most interesting is his relationship with his good friend Bruce Rauner. And we're seeing now something new beginning to emerge, where, again, as is so often done, policy is released to us by back channels to the newspapers, and we see these stories coming out about how he now favors doing some kind of property tax rebate or at least some kind of exemption, so that people who own, the little old lady in the bungalow will not pay the full brunt of Mayor Emanuel's 60% increase or whatever it is. But in order to do that, he needs Rauner's help.
And Rauner said last night he doesn't want to help.
So Emanuel's in a very interesting position here where even if he doesn't get it, he still appears to be on the side of the little old lady in the bungalow.
That's right. But there's a bigger, scarier issue, I think, that's lurking, which is that even though we might be able to have an exemption this year, what every analyst I've spoken to for muni bonds and who looks at the budget for the city says is that this property tax increase and the money that's raised this year really only gets us to our minimum credit card payment for everything that we owe on debt and pensions. So we're going to have another property tax increase, or we're going to have something else that's going to come next year, because we're really not looking at it very hard. And when you talk to people who are in city council and staff, they say, yeah, we know. We're just not able to deliver everything at once because it's too hard to take one big bite. So, the issue that we have is that the city is asking for a certain amount of money. It needs way more. And Rauner, who is on a very devoted mission to eliminate collective bargaining for government employees, says, I'm not going to talk about anything until we eliminate collective bargaining, which is a no-go issue for anybody that's in the Democratic Party.
But it's got to be giving him some queasy stomach when he looks at that and says, wow, I could really, this could really backfire on me in the city of Chicago. If
Rauner, I think he doesn't care. If you take a look at his playbook, the way that he has been successful is by buying companies and then basically saying to every other constituent that's connected to the company, I'm going to burn this place down until you give me everything that I want.
And I might burn it down anyway, even after you've given it to me.
And he's basically been successful by convincing everybody that he's crazier than anybody else.
All right, well, can you give me 10 seconds on the CTU said yesterday that they're going to start repping charter teachers. There's like 1,000 charter teachers. Is that 10 seconds? Is that going to make a difference?
I think it will. It's going to make CTU larger, and it's going to make a change in terms of how the charters operate. It's going to make it harder for the charters to operate as a completely separate body.
Interesting. It is going to be very interesting to watch. Mike, thanks for being here again.
Wonderful to be here.
I always enjoy having you here.
Thank you.
Mike Fourcher is the co-founder of Aldertrack, and still working on it every single day.
That's right.
And it's good to have you back, and we'll have you back again sometime soon, too.
Thank you.
You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. Do you know that you can find us here on cable, but you can also see us online at this address any old time you want? It is television on demand. Access television that you can access. Check us out and also subscribe on iTunes, and we'll be back next week with another program. Bruce Dumont will be joining us next week. Oh my God. Join us then. Thanks. Bye.